You are listening to the Freedom Podcast with Van Moody. Our desire is that you begin to live in freedom every day. Freedom in your mind, freedom in your finances, freedom from the external pressures of life. Prepare to be transformed as we seek to be free, mind, body, and soul. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Freedom Podcast with me, your host, Van Moody. On this podcast, we are going to explore a variety of topics that are critical to a life of freedom, purpose, and fulfillment. I want to thank you for joining us. You can expect a lot on this incredible podcast: great conversation, wisdom, laughter, authenticity, but most importantly, practical guidance for how to be free in a variety of areas in your life. Now, one of the topics that we will explore each month on this Freedom Podcast is financial freedom. And when it comes to financial freedom, I am blessed to be joined by my co-hostess with the mostest, George Thompson, my brother from another mother. We both have long believed that financial literacy and financial empowerment is the new civil rights movement, which means that you cannot truly experience a life of freedom without financial freedom, which is why this topic is extremely important and we're passionate about it. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast, where we dig even deeper on financial freedom. Now, on today's podcast, George, we want to jump into talking about the different levels of how people live financially. Now, you've written about this in your book, that there are, five stages or phases of financial living. Unpack that for us as we get started today.
Gotcha. All right. Hello, family. How you doing? So one of the things is we have to look at what level we're at financially. So first one, let's just look at what level you're at. The first level is struggling and sinking. That means the inability to pay your current bills. And then the next level is you're just surviving and struggling and sinking. Next level is steady. You have just enough to pay your bills. But the problem with that is if something snaps, crackles, or pops, then you fall down to struggling. Then the next level is solid. That means you've been working somewhere for a while, putting in the 401k, kind of taking a 1 week vacation. That's solid. You kind of been, solid area. Then the next level is surplus. Just say surplus. Surplus is extra money. Typically in that, you've also still been working somewhere for a while, or you may own a business. Then the next level, which is the highest level, is called service. That's where you're not concerned with finances. You just do whatever God puts you on this earth to do. So right now, think to yourself, what level are you on? And then how are we going to get to the next level? Bishop, man?
Well, George, I think that that's so important because you and I know that there are an overwhelming amount of people that are at that first level. I mean, they are struggling. They are maybe surviving, but they are not thriving. And I think that that's a critical place for us to start on today's podcast because we want to help people not just survive, we want them to thrive. And in order for them to do that, there's some critical things that you and I know that they have to do. There's a biblical principle that I think is really the beginning of one critical piece that people need to understand if they're going to move from surviving to thriving. And this principle you see in a lot of different places. You see it in Leviticus 23, when God talks about when you reap your harvest of the land, don't reap to the very edges of the field. You see this again in the life of Boaz when Ruth and Naomi are looking to try to rebuild their life. And they encounter Boaz, who instructs his employees to do exactly what Leviticus says, to not glean to the edge of the fields, which then, makes room for Ruth to be able to go and glean and to create a little bit of resources for her and Naomi. And so you see this principle that you and I call acting your wage,
Right.
which is a big deal because a lot of individuals are surviving, not thriving. They're not able to move up the ladder of these financial levels because they are spending more than they are bringing in. Why is that so critical for you in the work that you've been doing, working with families to not only survive but thrive, particularly as it relates to creating wealth?
Right. So first of all, it's very critical. One of the reasons why I also brought up is you use great examples in the Bible. And also just want to let you know I grew up in the Midwest. So it's really good hearing that about how they had the fields. We're talking about Boaz, we're talking about Leviticus, not utilizing everything you have. So imagine having a cornfield, or you pick whatever field you have, but let's use a cornfield. If you eat up or use the entire amount, then you don't have enough to plant enough to have other things. Or even if we use apples, you don't have enough to plant to keep going. So we want to consume everything that we have, because that puts you in a bad position later on, because sometimes if you overspend, then what do? You start putting things on credit cards. You start doing this thing because you start spending actually more than what you bring in. And that is very critical. And that's one of the parts we walk through, is actually having a budget. So one thing is that we also said people that are struggling, but then also people that are steady. That's also a tough spot, because some people go, well, I'm just doing fine. The problem is what you're seeing, what just happened, I should say in the U.S. or all over the world recently. Because then when inflation hits and gas prices rise, food prices rise, doing this, if you spend everything you have, and then all of a sudden things cost more, then how do you pay for them? You start adding things to credit cards. So that's why it's critical that you start saving at least 10% of your income. And then you say, where I get that from is because the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to tithe. We tithe, we bring back to God what He's blessed us with. Then we do the exact same thing for ourselves. We save and invest. We're going to talk about investing 10%. But first, we have to start with that, because we want to start with that 10% mindset of saving.
Yeah, George, what's interesting about that is I remember reading, I'm a big fan of history, and I remember reading, I think it was John D Rockefeller, how he taught his children to live on the 10-10-80 principle. Right. 10% to God, 10% to yourself, and then what you budget and live off of is 80%. I think that's so critical, but if we're going to be able to do that, we have to act our wage. Now, here's some interesting stats about, the situation in America. 50% of Americans have less than 1 month's income when emergencies come. So as you referenced, when inflation hits, gas prices go up, the cost of bread and butter and bananas goes up, then you're stretched, because if you only have 1 month of income for emergencies, that begins to eat through it. If your car breaks down, if the refrigerator is on the fritz, then you go through that emergency fund quickly. But here's another sad stat. 68% of households don't even have a budget. So we're going to really dig into that in a minute. But think about that. Nearly 70% of people in America don't even have a budget. So that means that they're flying blind. And what's interesting about that is we wouldn't drive a car with a blindfold on. We wouldn't get on a plane where the pilot was blind. So why is it that we want to run our finances that way? But here's another sad stat. 76% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. So they're definitely not living the 10-10-80 principle. They're not doing those things. But then here's another sad stat. Most people in America, this 76%, are living 137% of their income, which means that they are spending more than they bring in. And that's the way we keep digging a deeper and deeper and deeper hole. But yet, when you think about Boaz, or when you think about this principle in Leviticus, what God instructs us to do is the exact opposite. To not spend everything we have, but to create financial margin. And the way that you do that is you've got to act your wage. Meaning, if you bring in $60,000 or $30,000 a year, then if you're going to follow the 10-10-80 principle, then 80% of that is what you ought to base your budget and your living on. If you don't do that, you'll never be able to tithe, you'll never be able to pay yourself and save, and you will always be in the hole. I love Proverbs 21:5, and then I'll kick it to you, George. This notion of when the Bible says plan carefully and you'll have plenty, but if you act too quickly, you'll never have enough. And I think that typifies what a lot of people are doing. They're flying blind, they are overextended, they are not planning carefully, and so they don't have enough.
Right. And I think that everything that when you get those statistics, some of those were symptoms and some of those were just the problem. That's actually the problem. Like I'm saying, when people are living paycheck to paycheck, and you said 78%, then you gave those percentages, those same percentages didn't have a budget. And I think a lot of it is psychological, meaning this is that some people think that a budget is constricting. Actually, a budget actually helps you get more freedom because you can find out where your money goes. You actually want to look at where it goes. I have I have an example in my book that I use where I divide money up into three areas. One is installment debt. Just that is what you owe to people. Those are debts. In other words, what your mortgage balance is, what you owe on the home, what you owe on your car, what you owe for credit cards. And then you have what you have budgeted for the month. In other words, what your mortgage payment is, what your car payment is, and then what your cell phone, everything. But it goes from priority from top to the bottom. And then the third column, it's called, and we're getting a little bit in this today, but we want to really get into this in a later episode, is prosperity dollars. Is that how much you put towards prosperity? If you could, just hold up three fingers. Whenever you make money, there's only three things you can do with it. The first is you can spend it. The second thing you can do, we won't spend any time on that because I think everybody's got that down. The second thing you can do is you can lend it. That means put it in the bank. But then we found out we really can't put money in the bank because banks pay 0.00001% interest, right? And then the third thing you can do is you can own something. That means you can own what? A home, bike, car, but also what? You can own stocks, investments, things like that build generational wealth. So we got to look at how we're doing it. And those are the exact same three categories. What do we have as far as debt? What do we have as far as our budget? And then what do we spend on prosperity? So that's really where we want to look at, because if someone is struggling, more than likely all their money is going to it's just coming in and coming out and coming paycheck to paycheck. So how we want to stop that process is, number one, is we eventually want to start looking at how we're going to get more income. We can talk about saving money and different things like this. And then we want to talk about being a good steward over what you do have. Because then there's also Bishop Van, there are also people that have money, that make money, but they just spend it all. Because, there's a definition, you know what I mean? Poor, broke, right? Poor is you don't have anything. Broke is you got stuff, you just can't keep paying for it all. So we have to define that first, find out where you are, and then we want to have a budget and be intentional with it to find out where our money's flowing, because we want to start flowing it from all the debts to have the budget smaller to where we can build more prosperity.
Absolutely. So now you moved us to really the next piece. If we're going to act your wage, you got to, number one, have margin. You cannot glean to the edge of the fields. You absolutely cannot spend everything that you bring in. Now, a moment ago, we talked about the 10-10-80 principle.
Right.
I actually am a little bit more aggressive, and I think about it like 10-10-70-10. Right. 10% tithe, 10% paying yourself. I think, George, you call it save vesting, right? You're saving, right, but you're saving those dollars so that you can earmark money to invest, right? But then 70% is for obligations, right? That's your mortgage. Those are your bills. That's going to the movies. That's your car. But then 10%, another 10% is for margin and cushion. That's right. That's play money, or maybe you want to add that to your save vesting column. The name of the game is you want to get the percentage of your budget for your obligations. You want to make that as small as possible, and you want to increase the area of your margin, because then you can really supersize your wealth building desires. But let's talk a little bit more about this whole notion of moving slow.
Can I say something about what you just said? I don't want to interrupt, but I got to say this because this is actually really good what you said. Do you see how, also I want all of our listeners to understand that when you're doing this, do you see how he moved from 10-10-80 to 70? Is that actually when you start doing a budget and you start really getting it down, because there's something called fixed expenses. Those are ones you just that you have. That's your mortgage, different things like that are just ones, or if your rent, those are ones you just have to pay. And then those are fixed, those are like hard costs. Then you have soft ones, kind of like entertainment, eating out, different things like that you do for fun. There's certain sacrifices that you make so that you can increase your wealth to where you can lower your expenses. Like, in other words, if you own a home, then buying another home, and then having that be a source of income, thus offsetting that, then making your budget smaller, or your budget starts generating income. I'm sorry, I got excited right there when I said that. It makes your budget start generating income. So then, look at this. So I want you guys even to do this. Don't close your eyes if you're driving. But imagine this, is that if you had enough income on your budget, and you guys are advanced, we'll do this later on business, they call it a balance sheet. When you have enough income on there, then you're only giving away a certain amount of money a year. Do you see that? Where we said we're giving out, hey, you know what? We're spending 80% of our money. You know what? Maybe get your budget down to where you're saying, I'm only just giving away, and I'm going to say giving away because that's what you're doing with all those expenses. Let's say it gets down to 50, or let's say it goes down to 30%. That's what you want to be later on when you start to retire, because you have income to pay the bills. So we're starting off at 10, 10, 80. Then he said 10, 10, 70. But you can go to just giving away 50% of it to all your bills. And then you lower it. That's how you move towards retirement or toward just doing what you like to do. Remember, that's the service level. Go ahead, Pat.
I love it. So let's unpack this, because you talked about this notion of moving slow. Spend it, lend it, or own something. When we all earn $1, there are only three things we can do with it. You can spend it, and we know based on having margin, you can't spend everything that you bring in. You can't glean to the edges of your field. You can lend it, okay? Or you can own something. And owning something, having assets. I love to describe it this way: understanding the difference between assets and liabilities.
Right.
The problem that a lot of people have is we spend so much money on liabilities. Liabilities take money out of your budget, out of your pocket, out of your household, instead of buying assets. Assets create money coming into your household, like you were talking about. This is how we get our budget lower, because we have more assets that are creating dollars that are coming in. So that's the notion of why owning something is so important. You know, I think about Proverbs 21:20 that says how wise people live in wealth and luxury, but stupid people spend their money as fast as they get it. And now, for those that may have been offended by that, that's not me. That's the Good News translation of the Bible, right? But we can't get to the place where we own something if we're spending all of our dollars or lending all of our dollars out instead of shifting our focus to being able to own something. This is the most important component if we're going to move from struggling or surviving to thriving. George, how did you get started, or how would you advise someone to get started shifting their focus to owning more and not just spending it all?
Okay, the first thing is, and then I want everyone to write this down again. If you're over 40, write this down. If you're under 40, type it down. Is the first thing you want to change? Bishop Moody, you know what you want to change? Your mindset. I want to give you a prime example. We just went on a vacation, went to Hawaii with our kids, and one of the things I want to do, and I can't turn this off, so I just want to let you guys know, we did a couple of things. I, number one, knew that the inflation things were very high in Hawaii. Everything's shipped there, everything's done there. That way, I brought all of our food, most of our food, all the snacks for the kids with us. That's number one. Number two is, I'm sitting out there one day and the kids want a little paddleboard. And now, believe it or not, this guy, you'd go up and you'd rent a paddleboard. And they were sitting there saying it was like $25 an hour and all this stuff. And my wife, they had out there 1 hour. And I said, Georgie, my wife said, let's go renew another hour. I said, let me talk to him. I brought my kids with me, one of my sons with me. I said, sir? He said, yeah. I said, how are you doing? I said, cool. I said, why don't you know right now? First of all, what's your name? I found his name, talked to him. I said, you know what time it is right now? It's 2 o'clock. And I said, what time do you close? He said, 5. I said, hey, I'd like to rent the rest of this for the rest of the day. And I told him for $15. And he looked at me and said, but on the board here it says $25. And I said, I'm very well aware of that board. And I started talking to him like an owner. And then anyway, so he did that. And he also let me rent something else from him. But do you see what I did? I'm an owner. So when we rent properties to people, you're renting time. He was essentially renting me a paddleboard. But I went over to him, told him what time it was, and he had 4 of them sitting over there. And he'd rather have $15 than none. So you understand? I'm talking to him owner to owner. Everybody, what's the second thing that I told you that I did first of all? I brought one of my kids with me to let them know 2 things. One, everything is negotiable. And when you are an owner, you talk to people like owners. So what's the first thing I did? I didn't talk all crazy. I asked him what his name was. By the way, his name was Evie, and the other guy's name was Devontae. I talked to them. And then what did I want them to do? I gave them a win-win situation. They had these boards just sitting there. I said, hey, man, I should have got another one too. You know what I mean? But I said, hey, you guys are trying to get a certain revenue number. I'm going to help you with that revenue number, but I'm going to make sure I got a shade and I have something in there. So it's not about, it's like that you go on a trip. See that? We said that? I went on a trip, but then what did I do? I lowered my expenses, but then I still helped in that economy or helping them do that. But it's really a mindset. It's really a mindset. Is first is you have to become an owner mindset. And just like we do later on, I want to do even whole shows on this. Is this, and I'm not making a stock recommendation and everything, but I really like Costco, and you always you always hear me bring it up when I minister and everything. Is you can tell I'm a shareholder of that company that I own. I'm an owner of the stock because when I come into Costco, I greet the staff, I do everything, and I shop there. Because I'm buying something that I own. And in my mind, it's like, I mean, right now, if somebody shoplifts, I'm going to tackle them. I'm like, man, put that stuff back. You know what I mean? Because I don't know why I said that. Anyway, but I'm the owner. So, you know what I mean? Like, so it's a different mentality. And my kids see that. In my mind, I feel like every time I'm shopping, and then when I get my rebate back from Costco and different things and all the stuff, and I just feel like I'm getting back dividends. Do you see that? We need to own stocks of companies. We're not going to cover this today. We're going to own companies. And then we're going to go there and shop at those places because we're owners. And we have to have an owner. You're listening on audio. I'm tapping my head. You have to have an owner mentality, and I have that, and I can't turn it off. If I'm walking in a thing, like just the way I switch that whole thing, and then and just that's the way you have to have it. But it starts with the mentality of that.
I love that, George. I love even how the illustration that you gave of your recent vacation to Hawaii, how it demonstrates how intentional we have to be, because I know a lot of people that would just say, oh, I'm going to Hawaii and I'm going to order from room service, and they are just killing their budget, because things are going to be overpriced in this economy with inflation. It's even higher. But just the intentionality of the mindset that we're taking this vacation, but I still want to make sure that I'm focused on my wealth creation goals. I feel the same way that you feel about Costco with Apple, right? I always tell people I'm apostolic because, hey, I'm gonna buy products that I own, and praise God for the Tesla stock split, right, today. So
right. So we have to now wait. Don't talk. Come on now. Don't do this, 'cause guys. We're gonna do a show completely on this. But you're right with the mindset. I'm telling you, and you guys, just type in the chat or how are you doing? Because they have something in Hawaii called the ABC store, and it is like the cost. It's like a 7-Eleven, and everyone's just walking there buying stuff. I'm like, there's a grocery store. I looked up this grocery store a mile and a half, and when I do my morning walk, and I do a wealth walk where I go over my morning and go over all of what I'm going to do. And I was doing Hawaii, and I walk down the grocery store, come back, and it was like it's like you got to look at all of these things. And the reason why I bring these things up and saving money is somebody saying, I can't afford to go to Hawaii. I'm like, you can the way I went, but I don't know if you can doing it where you just spending everything. Then you're putting that on credit cards, and we'll talk about that at issue about credit cards, because I call that plastic crack. You know what I mean? Like that has to stop. And if you do that stuff needs to be paid off. And then you're using cash flow. That is the exact opposite of that. That means you cash flow, you move on, you don't have anxiety when you come back from these trips and in doing it. But it's Incredible. Really a mindset.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's a good place to pause. We got so much to talk about, and we look forward to upcoming episodes. But the 3 critical things that you need to know if you are going to act your wage and move from struggling and surviving to ultimately thriving and to become steady and then ultimately to have surplus, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, those 5 stages of financial being. If you want to begin to move up those 5 stages, then you have to make sure that you're creating margin in your budget. You have to move slow, meaning you understand that when you get money, you have 3 options to either spend it, lend it, or own something. And owning something is really where you want to be. But then you've also, to George's final point, you have to develop your mind. I like, George, how MIND also is an acronym that stands for money, intelligence, need, and discipline. What you illustrated with your Hawaii trip is the discipline and the mentality that you're on this wealth journey. You also want to make sure that you include your kids in this wealth journey, and that's why those decisions were done. So there's so much more that we could talk about in this episode, but hey, we want you to make sure that you like this podcast, that you reach out and tell somebody about it, and that you greet us on the next episode. If you like the podcast and if you subscribe, you'll get notifications as we release new episodes. Each month, we're going to be digging into more topics on all things freedom, but particularly financial freedom. You can always gain more information from my co-hostess with the mostest, George B. Thompson, at georgebthompson.com. You can connect with me at vanmoody.org or twccc.org. It's been a great episode, and we look forward to seeing you and connecting with you on our next podcast episode. Thanks for joining us on the Freedom Podcast as we dig deeper into all things financial freedom. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Freedom Podcast. For a broader range of topics, go to Van Moody's YouTube page or visit twccc.org.